Bink's heart was thudding, but he forced himself to stand upright and still, facing the menace as it came. He lifted one finger in an obscene gesture at it. The dragon opened its jaws, blowing out a tremendous cloud of fire and smoke that enveloped Bink, singeing the hair of his body and leaving him untouched. He had gambled and won. He had been almost certain, but his body still trembled in reaction, for none of his senses had doubted the illusion. Only his brain had defended him, preventing him from being reduced to quivering acquiescence to the will of the sorceress, or from being herded into some genuine hazard. Illusions could kill if one heeded them. Bink moved out again, with more confidence. If there were a real dragon in the vicinity, there would have been no need for an illusory one. Therefore, all dragons here were illusion. He stumbled. Illusion could hurt him in another way, though, by covering up dangerous breaks in the terrain, forcing him to misstep or fall or drop into a well. He would have to watch his step, literally. As he concentrated on the region near his feet, he was able to penetrate the illusion with greater facility. Iris's talent was phenomenal, but in covering the entire island, it was necessarily thinly spread. His will could oppose hers in a localized area, while her attention was distracted. Behind the facade of the flower gardens was the weedy wildness of the island. The palace was a rickety shack, first cousin to the farmhouses he had made along the way. Why build a good house when illusions could do it so much easier? His borrowed clothing, too, had changed. Now he wore a crude feminine shawl and, he verified with dismay, panties. Lacy silk girl-style panties. His fancy handkerchief was exactly what it appeared to be. Apparently the sorceress did indulge herself in some reality, and lace hankies were what she could afford, and panties. He hesitated. Should he go back for his own clothing? He didn't want to encounter Iris again, but to travel in the wilderness or meet people in this outfit. He had a vision of walking up to the good magician Humphrey to ask for his boon of information. Bink. Sir, I have come across Xanth at great peril to ask. Magician. For a new dress? A bra? Ho, ho, ho! Bink sighed, feeling his face redden again. He turned back. Iris spotted him as soon as he re-entered the shack. A flicker of hope lighted her face, and that briefly honest expression had more compulsion than all of her illusion. Human values moved Bink. He felt like the supreme heel. You changed your mind? She asked. Suddenly her voluptuous youth was back, and a section of the glittering palace formed around her. That dashed in. She was a creature of artifice, and he preferred reality, even the reality of a shack among weeds. Most of the farmers of Xanth had nothing better, after all. When illusion became an essential crutch to life, that life lost value. Just want my own clothes, Bink said. Though his decision was firm, he still felt like a heel for interfering with her splendid aspirations. He proceeded to the bathroom, which he now saw was an attached outhouse. The fabulous toilet was merely the usual board with a hole sawed in it, and flies buzzed merrily below it. The bathtub was a converted horse-watering trough. How had he taken a shower? He saw a bucket. Had he dumped water on his own head, not knowing it? His clothing and pack were in a pile on the floor. He started to change, but found that the facility was really only an opening in the back of the shack. Iris stood watching him. Had she watched him change before? If so, he had to take it as a compliment. Her approach had become much more direct and physical thereafter. His eyes fell on the bucket again. Someone had dumped water on him, and he was sure now that he had not done it himself. The only other person who could have done it... Ouch. But he was not about to display himself so freely to her again, though it was obvious that he had no physical secrets remaining. He picked up his things and headed for the door. Bink... He paused. The rest of the house was dull wood, with flaking paint, straw on the floor, and light showing through the cracks, but the sorceress herself was lovely. She was very little, and looked like a lush 18. What do you want in a woman? She asked him. Voluptuousness? She became extremely well endowed, with an exaggerated hourglass figure. Youth? Suddenly she looked 14, very slender, lineless, and innocent. Maturity? She was herself again, but better dressed. Competence? Now she was conservatively dressed, about 25, quite shapely, but of a businesslike mien. Violence? The Amazon again, robust, but still lovely. I don't know, Bink said. I'd really hate to choose. Sometimes I want one thing, sometimes another. It can be all yours, she said, the alluring 14-year-old reappearing. No other woman can make this problem. No other woman can make this promise. Bink was suddenly forcefully tempted. There were times when he wanted this, though he had never dared to admit it openly. The sorceress's magic was potent indeed, the strongest he had ever experienced. So it was illusion, yet in Xanth illusion abounded and was quite legitimate. It was never possible to know precisely what was real. In fact, illusion was part of Xanth's reality, an important part. Iris really could bring him wealth and power and citizenship, and she could be, for him, any kind of woman he wanted, or all kinds. Furthermore, through her illusion applied politically, she could in time create an identical reality. She could build an actual crystal palace with all the trappings. The power of the queenship would make this possible. In that light, it was reality she offered, with her magic simply a means to the end. But what was actually in her scheming mind? The reality of her inner thoughts might not be sweet at all. He could never be sure he understood her completely, and therefore could never trust her completely. He was not at all sure she would make a good queen. She was too interested in the trappings of power, instead of the welfare of the land of Xanth as a whole. "I'm sorry," he said, and turned away. She let him go. No more palace, no more stone. She had accepted his decision, and that, perversely, tempted him again. He could not call her evil. She was merely a woman with a need, and she had offered a deal, and that was mature enough to accede to necessity once her temper cooled. But he forced himself to keep going, trusting his logic more than his meandering feeling. He picked his way down to the sagging wharf where the rowboat was tied. The craft looked insecure, but it had brought him here, so it could take him away. He got into it and stepped into a puddle. The boat leaked. He grabbed a rusty pail and bailed it out somewhat, then sat and took the oars. Iris must have performed quite a maneuver to row this boat while seeming to be an idle queen. She had a lot of plain old-fashioned practical talent to supplement her magic. She probably could make a good ruler of Xanth if she ever found a man who would go along with her. Why hadn't he cooperated? As he rowed, he considered the matter more carefully, looking back at the Isle of Illusion. His superficial reasons were sufficient for the moment, but not for an enduring decision. He must have some underlying rationale to which he was true, even though he gave himself some more presentable justification. It could not just be his memory of Sabrina, evocative as that was, for Iris was as much of a woman as Sabrina, and much more magical. There had to be something else, diffuse but immense. Ah, he had it. It was his love of Xanth. He could not allow himself to become the instrument of his homeland's corruption. Though the present king was ineffective and many people were developing, Though the present king was ineffective and many problems were developing, still Bink was loyal to the established order. The days of anarchy or of brute might making right were over. There were set procedures for the transfer of authority, and these had to be honored. Bink would do anything to stay in Xanth, except to betray it. The ocean was calm. The devastating rocks of the shore had also been illusion. There was, after all, a small beach, but it was not where it had seemed to be, either when he thought he ran along it or after he was in the brine. A long, narrow pier angled out from the side of the chasm. That was what he had run along at the beginning, until he had simply run off the end, splashing abruptly into deep water, in more than one sense. He beached his boat on the south shore. Now, how was he to return the boat to the sorceress? No way. If she didn't have another boat, she would simply have to swim for it. He regretted that, but he was not going back to the Isle of Illusion again. With her power, she could probably scare away any sea creatures that threatened, and he was sure she was an adequate swimmer. He changed into his original clothes, salty though they might be, shrugged into his knapsack, and turned his face to the west.